Welcome to the Freak Show, fellow freaks.
I'm Matthew Brockmeyer.
And I'm Krista Carmen.
And this is
Murder Coaster.
Randy Woodfield was many things to many people. A star athlete and high school jock who was drafted into the NFL and played for the Green Bay Packers. A devout Christian involved in prayer groups and fellowships. An all-American son and brother. Charming and good-looking guy who sought to model in Playgirl magazine. He was also a sexual sadist, a thief, a rapist, a necrophiliac and psychopathic serial killer. Despite these many contrasting personas, he is now known to history under one name, the I-5 killer. In 1980 and 1981, Randy Woodfield terrified residents of Washington, California, and Oregon as he roamed an 800-mile stretch of highway on a horrible spree of robbery, rape, and murder. He is linked directly to 18 murders and is suspected of killing as many as 44 women. Ladies and gentlemen, we present to you the savage and horrible story of Randy Woodfield, the dreaded and disgusting I-5 killer.
Let's begin. Prologue. The Man with the Silver Gun. At first, the mysterious man with the silver gun was just known as the I-5 Bandit, an armed thief roaming the 800 miles of Interstate 5 from Bellingham, Washington on the Canadian border, down through Oregon and into the Cascade Range of Northern California.
On December 9th, 1980, the I-5 Bandit appeared at an Arco gas station in Vancouver, Washington. A tall man wearing a fake beard that was falling off his face, flashing a small silver pistol and telling the young woman behind the counter, "It's for real," before demanding the cash in the register and disappearing into the night.
Just 4 days later, 108 miles south in Eugene, Oregon, the bandit appeared again, wearing the same fake beard, this time with a Band-Aid across his nose, at a Baskin-Robbins ice cream parlor, demanding the cash from the register. The next night, he hit the Arctic Circle in Albany, Oregon. Then 4 days before Christmas in Seattle, Washington, he appeared at a Church's Fried Chicken. This time, he wasn't after money. Instead, he shoved his way into a bathroom with a female employee and forced her at gunpoint to masturbate him.
20 minutes later, he robbed a Baskin-Robbins in Bothell, Washington.
In January, he returned to the same Arco gas station where the robbery spree had started, demanding the female attendant show him her breasts before he left. 3 days later, he hit the grocery cart market in Eugene, Oregon, taking a pack of Vantage cigarettes and $35. Less than 24 hours later, he was in Sutherland, Oregon, with 2 Band-Aids on his nose this time. The girl behind the counter thought it was a joke and laughed at him, so he shot her in the shoulder.
This time, a witness had seen his car, a yellowish Volkswagen Bug.
Growing bolder, thicker, and more deranged and disgusting, the man with the silver gun, fake beard, and the Band-Aid on his nose burst into a home in Corvallis, Oregon, where 2 small children were alone. Marisou Green, 10, and her 8-year-old sister, Megan. saying he had to use the phone. He then forced them to fellate and masturbate him.
Then, on January 18th, 1981, a 911 call was made in Salem, Oregon.
911, what's your emergency?
We've been shot. Please help us.
Okay, where are you?
River Road or Commercial Street near the Fun Machine. The Transamerica Title Building. Please hurry. He's gonna come back and kill me. I think she's dead.
An ambulance is on the way. Just stay on the line with me now.
Reserve Deputy Greg Roach was the first on the scene. The Transamerica Title Building had windows on all four sides, all lit up, and gazing inside he could see a bizarre scene. A naked woman wandering around, dazed, slipping into a back office. Another naked woman lying prone on the floor, her face turned away, a pool of blood spreading from her head.
If the gunman was still in there in the back room the first woman had gone to, it would be incredibly dangerous for the officer to go inside without backup. Yet, with two wounded victims in need of medical attention, he felt he had no choice. So he bravely drew his service revolver and entered, going room to room and clearing the building, then radioing in that it was safe for paramedics.
Beth Wilmot, who'd made the 911 call, was in a deep state of shock. She had no idea that she was naked. Paramedics covered her with a blanket. The right side of her face was swollen, blood oozing from behind her right ear. A medic gasping in amazement when he realized she'd been shot in the head not once, but twice.
Her friend, Sherry Hall, was comatose on the floor, her vital signs so faint they barely registered. She'd been shot 3 times in the head. Medics forced oxygen in her lungs and sped her off in an ambulance, but there was little hope.
A deputy rode with Beth to the hospital, and the girl was able to tell him the story. She and her best friend Sherry, both just 20 years old, but who looked much younger, worked for her father's cleaning service and cleaned the Transamerica building every Sunday. The man with the silver gun and the Band-Aid on his nose had just slipped in the unlocked doors while they were cleaning, then led them off at gunpoint, forcing them to strip naked and fillet him before forcing them to lie face down on the floor and shooting each of them in the head.
Beth says she just went still and played dead, but that Sherry had begun to convulse and twitch, causing the gunman to fire again.
Amazingly, the first shot that hit Beth did not penetrate her skull and was found nestled in her matted hair, flattened. Whether it was a defective round with not enough firepower, or if Beth had extraordinarily thick skull density, isn't known. The second shot entered below her scalp, skimming her skull as it burrowed under her skin and lodged itself by her right ear.
An acid phosphate swab tested positive for semen in Beth's throat. The killer was a secretor, meaning he had left ABO blood group antigens in his bodily fluids and had B blood. B secretors make up less than 9% of the population.
Sherry Hull died in the Salem, Oregon Memorial Hospital at 1:20 a.m. without ever gaining consciousness. The I-5 bandit had just become the I-5 killer.
On February 3rd, 1981, in Mountain Gate, California, 400 miles south of Salem on Interstate 5, 12-year-old Kristen Jarvis returned home from a basketball game to find her mother, Donna Eckert, and her 14-year-old sister, Janelle, in bed together, naked, bound and gagged with white athletic tape, each shot multiple times in the head.
The coroner determined they'd been murdered just an hour before they'd been discovered, meaning Kristen could easily have walked in on the horror and become a victim herself.
And then lab reports confirmed it. The bullets found in the bodies of Donna Eckert and Janelle Jarvis perfectly matched those removed from Sherry Hall and Beth Wilmot. They had been fired from the same gun.
There was a serial killer loose, roaming up and down Interstate 5, from the Canadian border down into the Cascade Range of Northern California.
As the media went wild and law enforcement from 3 states and multiple jurisdictions met, they all wondered, who was this man with the silver gun, the fake beard, and band-aids on his nose? Who was this horrible and dreaded monster, the I-5 killer?
Chapter 1. Little Randy.
Randall Brent Woodfield was born on December 26, 1950, the day after Christmas, in Salem, Oregon. The third child of an upper-middle-class family, his father, Walter, who went by Jack, was an executive at Pacific Northwest Bell Telephone Company, and his mother, Donna Jean, was a homemaker.
The Woodfield family were well known and respected, considered pillars in their community. Jack was a well-liked business executive devoted to work, and Donna Jean was known for her fashion flair and sense of style, looking much younger than her years. Randy's 2 older sisters were gifted students, one of whom became a doctor and the other an attorney.
Randy, the baby of the family, crawled early, walked early. He was coddled by his loving older sisters and given every indulgence. Breastfeeding had just come back into vogue after years of rigidly scheduled formula bottle feeding, and Randy's mother was sure to follow this new trend and give her child everything she could.
When he was just a small child, Randy's family moved from Salem to Otter Rock, Oregon, a small seaside community approximately 8 miles north of Newport, a very safe and all-American town. It is here, in this perfect white bread suburbia of picket fences and ornamental flower gardens, that Randy would grow up, never wanting for a thing, spoiled and indulged.
Randy's father, Jack, was working his way up the company ladder, dedicating himself to Pacific Bell, and was often away from home, leaving Randy to be raised by his mother and 2 sisters, which he began to resent.
He didn't think he needed a babysitter, especially as his sisters didn't need one. He hated being the baby of the family, and he would often fight with his sisters, and all discipline was meted out by his mother.
True crime author Ann Rule believes this caused his self-esteem to be dependent on how women saw and treated him, causing him to both want to please women as well as to hate them and desire to defile them at the same time.
He also hated how everyone called him Randy, feeling it made him insignificant. He thought Randy was too cute, a baby name, and repeatedly asked to be referred to as Randall, but no one listened, and his name would forevermore be Randy.
Randy. You ever watch Trailer Park Boys?
No, but my husband does.
Randy. Gee, Mr. Leahy, you just keep saying my name over and over. Randy.
Randy was tall and gangly, with dark curly hair, and liked playing the accordion.
That must have been quite the sight and sound.
But Randy soon filled out, growing broad-shouldered, his arms and legs becoming muscular, and where his true talents lay became apparent: sports.
Randy was an outstanding athlete, a star on the track team, baseball, basketball, football. He made the All-State first time in football when he was still a junior. He had an honorable mention in All-State basketball, played varsity baseball, was a star sprinter.
His father started a scrapbook of his athletic accomplishments. Soon it was full, and he was starting another, then another.
Randy's dream and obsession was to play professional football, to be a wide receiver in the NFL. And few who knew him doubted that he'd accomplish this goal.
But inside, he fumed. His sisters all had their driver's licenses and were out on dates and going to parties, and he was still the baby stuck at home. All of this building up with his puberty and sexual awakening for which there was no outlet. Sex was just not talked about in 1950s America. It was a dark, taboo subject, burbling beneath the surface of squeaky clean suburbia, white picket fences, poodle skirts, and sock hops.
Randy found relief from this agonizing pressure by sexually terrorizing women. While just a junior in high school, he'd wander out to dark, secluded places, lurking, an erection aching in his pants. When a woman would walk by, he'd unsnap his pants and expose himself, saying, "Look at this," as he then sprinted away.
Sometimes he'd creep up to windows at night, peer inside and masturbate while letting dark sexual fantasies of violence and degradation play in his little head.
Eventually, he was caught and arrested. It was a tiny town. But the football coach intervened, telling the police, "Oh, it's just a boy being a boy." And Randy was destined for greatness. He was going to be a star one day, make all of Oregon proud. And so, no charges were ever pressed.
Randy continued to dominate athletically in high school and was the star football player the year of his graduation, 1969.
Despite his claims that all the major colleges in the Northwest were trying to recruit him with scholarships, Randy then attended Treasure Valley Community College, clear across the state on the Idaho border.
Not the most well-known college for athletic achievements, but here he was the co-captain of the varsity football team, played varsity basketball, and in track set the freshman record for the long jump, 22 feet 6.5 inches.
But Randy began to display sociopathic traits. He stole tape cassettes from a guy in his dorm, getting himself branded as a thief. He dated a beautiful girl named Sharon McNeil, whom he became obsessed with. When she broke up with him, he broke into her house through a bathroom window, trashed the place, and stole a stuffed animal bull that he had given her.
He was arrested, but in the end, there wasn't enough physical evidence to make the charges stick.
Despite being arrested, Randall Woodfield would continue to call and harass Sharon McNeil until she had to get an unlisted telephone number. 10 years later, he disturbingly sent her a nude photograph of himself.
Ugh, Jesus. There were also reports of a man by Randy's description exposing himself to women in the area.
Somehow, Randy Woodfield had started equating punishing the entire female population with exposing his genitals to random female strangers. An extremely disturbing red flag. But in the wild and sleazy 70s, with the sexual revolution changing social norms, and streakers are running wild, the image of a grown man exposing himself became one of comedy. They became known as flashers. And it was all seen as kind of cute, not the dangerous and disgusting signs of a burgeoning sexual psychopath.
Randy was now 20 years old, and visiting his high school football field to throw the old pigskin around with some friends, he met 15-year-old Tracy Connors, only in the 8th grade, and they began going out.
She's in the fucking 8th grade. The 8th grade, a child. And he's starting his sophomore year in college. It's not cool. Not cool, but apparently That was somehow fine in 1971. She does say that she refused to have sex with him, and he did politely comply. Still, so wrong on so many levels.
Chapter 2. Are you ready for some football?
You a Hank Jr. fan?
No, I just have heard it one too many times.
In the spring of 1971, Randy started at Portland State University, playing wide receiver for their football team. It was not one of the Pac-8 schools like the University of Washington or the University of Oregon, which is actually my alma mater. Go Ducks! But there were still scouts who'd show up at games, some saying if he made a good showing at Portland State, he still had a chance at the big time.
And it was here that he found Jesus and was born again. He became a member of the Fellowship of the Portland State University Campus Crusade for Christ and the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Folks who knew him there describe him as soft-spoken and mild-mannered and very, very religious. He developed a reputation for only dating devoutly Christian girls.
But despite his newfound faith and having accepted Jesus in his heart as his personal savior, Randy continued exposing himself to women, wandering about the edges of Portland and over the bridge into Vancouver, Washington, taunting women with his erection, saying, "Hey, over here, look at this," then ducking down dark alleys and racing away to another part of town where he'd do it again.
To quote the great true crime writer Anne Rule, Randy Woodfield, the tall, dark, and handsome football star, the Christian athlete, was playing Russian roulette with his genitals.
Quite the way with words there.
Yeah.
Many of the women weren't as shocked at seeing his penis as they were that it was a young, good-looking guy that they'd probably date, and it wasn't some ugly old pervert.
In August of 1972, he was arrested in Vancouver for indecent exposure and received a suspended sentence, the judge letting him off with a warning.
Then in June of 1973 in Portland, he was arrested after lurking in the shadows, waving his dick around at women, hissing, "Hey, look at this, look at this."
Ugh. He was sentenced to 5 months in jail, but somehow wormed his way out of serving any time at all. And in February of 1974, he was arrested again and sentenced to 5 years probation, which he never followed up on and which was never enforced.
2 more times Randy would be picked up exposing himself, being released each time. Judges just liked him. Good-looking, Christian, white, from a good family, a star athlete and college student, and he was never violent or threatening. He just waved his dick around and ran off.
And then, after the 1973 football season at Portland State, it happened. Randy Woodfield's greatest dream came true. He was drafted by the Green Bay Packers.
Yay! It couldn't have happened to a better guy. He was he was just over the moon. A real NFL team with 5 championships and 2 Super Bowl victories. He'd grown up watching the Packers on television.
He signed his contract on February 20th, 1974. In it, he was obligated to keep himself in excellent physical condition, avoid drinking, stay away from gamblers and gambling resorts, wear a coat and necktie in public, as well as hotel lobbies and eating places. Should I say restaurants?
Yeah, sure. That's actually the language from the contract.
That's what I figured, but it's like weird.
Right.
I'll just make it sound more quotey. Wear a coat and necktie in public, as well as hotel lobbies and eating places. but there was not any clause regarding moral turpitude or the conviction of a crime.
He went to training camp in Scottsdale, Arizona, which went well. He then received a first-class plane ticket and limousine reservation to take him to Wisconsin. But he decided to turn this down and instead drive, as he wanted his own car for mobility.
He worked hard establishing himself as a key player on the field and received letters from the head coach and general manager, sending warm personal regards. Everything was going fantastically. But then, he was unexpectedly cut from the traveling squad.
Why he was suddenly dropped isn't known exactly. The Green Bay Packers refused to say why. Randy claims they just wanted a tackling dummy and that he was too tense, causing him to drop the ball, and he did have surprisingly small hands. He'd often hide them in photographs.
There very well could have been another reason why Randy was cut from the team. Detectives, years later, would say there were upwards of 20 incidents of indecent exposure in Wisconsin involving Randy Woodfield. One Wisconsin detective saying, quote, "He couldn't keep the thing in his pants."
Randy briefly played for the farm team Manitowoc Chiefs, but eventually left Wisconsin and returned to Portland, Oregon. An absolute failure, who'd come so close to achieving his dreams only to see them dashed away. If, as Ann Rule says, he was playing Russian roulette with his genitals, looks like he'd finally gotten a live round.
Chapter 3. Portland.
Salt tapping on my arm, your nervous body and lip, the bruises on your wrist say the things you can't quite find the words to say. And your freckles somehow more pronounced. The moment seems to stand right still. The movement of the ocean, like gracefulness in motion in the
Back in Portland, Oregon, Randy shared a 2-bedroom apartment with his old friend Tim Rossi, who is now an assistant professor at Reed College.
He got a job as a bartender, telling everyone he'd been cut from the Packers for flinching on the line, and that the coach was sending him films to review, but they never came. It was now 1975. Most of his graduating class were married with children and pursuing careers.
Meanwhile, a rapist has started lurking in nearby Dunaway Park. A man who would sneak up behind women and put a knife to their throat, force them to fillet him, then steal their purses. An attacker described as dark, handsome, and large.
Police had stakeouts at the large park, but they were ineffective, so a policewoman named Annette Jolin volunteered to act as a decoy and walk the deserted pathways, trying to lure the attacker while backup watched from the distance.
On Wednesday, March 5th, 1975, just before noon, which is so creepy because it's like the morning and you think being in the park at that time would be so safe. When Officer Annette Jolin was walking through a heavily forested and deserted area of the park, she felt she was being followed.
From the shadows, a man appeared behind her, holding a knife blade to her throat, demanding money. She gave him 8 marked bills from her purse, and he stared at her a moment as if deciding what to do next.
The tall man fondled her breast for a moment, then ducked away and headed off in a sprint.
But officers were waiting and nabbed the attacker. And can you guess who it was? Old Randy Woodfield. Can you believe it?
Randy. He meekly offered no resistance, claiming to be a college student at Portland State. Though his glory days of being the star wide receiver on the football team there were long past. He was charged with first-degree robbery and forced oral sodomy.
For some reason, that would come back to haunt them. Prosecutors dropped the oral sodomy charges, and Randy pled guilty to first-degree robbery, saying he was, quote, very sorry and deeply hurt to have caused so many problems.
So many problems is what he calls traumatizing women for their life after sexually assaulting them with a knife to their throat. And he was so sorry, but he told them he was a Christian and seeking help through his faith. Aw, that should make everything better, right?
He also said he was on steroids, which might have been inflaming his devious urges. But Randy Woodfield had been displaying psychopathic sexual deviancy long before he ever took his first shot of steroids.
He was sent to a psychologist, given an IQ test. He came in at a dead even 100, normal as can be. The final examination read,
It would be my opinion that Mr. Woodfield's problem is so severe as to be a very serious threat to the community, and although treating him as an outpatient might actually present him with a greater opportunity to be treated, I think this would present too great a risk to the community. For the safety of the community, he needs to be in an institutional setting. However, chances of being successfully treated in such a setting are rather dim.
Ugh, a crazy catch-22 there. And on June 10th, 1975, Randall Woodfield was sentenced to 10 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary for armed robbery. The judge decrying that the sexual offense charges had been dropped and saying he should actually be in a program for sexually dangerous offenders.
Chapter 4. Prisoner number 37376 of the Oregon State Prison.
Because the forced oral sodomy charges had been dropped, Randy was seen as just another thief in prison and didn't carry the stigma of a sexual offender, making life much easier for him inside the tall walls and barred cells.
He took college classes in typing, accounting, computer programming, and, interestingly, human sexuality. He worked in the dining room and kitchen and was paid 50 cents a day.
He joined the Master Men's Bible Club, the Freedom in Christ group, as well as a Bible study group that met in the yard. His grandmother, sisters, and parents visited with him often, as well as a couple of, quote, Christian girls.
He played basketball, ran track, and lifted weights, pumping his body and muscles up. He studied how to get released, what to say, how to act, and followed these to a T, telling counselors and psychologists that he accepted his guilt and realized he needed help, promising to seek psychiatric help if released, emphasizing that he was a Christian with a supportive and loving family and friends and former employees. In his own words,
I know I have a problem, and I want to keep on top of it at all times. I've learned to accept rejection from others, especially females. I don't take it personally anymore. It's taken me 27 years to grow up, but I'm making it now. I've got to stop running and face myself for what I am. I have now got the courage and confidence to meet my problems directly. I no longer feel I need to hide from them.
So after just 4 years of a 10-year sentence, Randy Woodfield was paroled in July of 1979.
Randy was released just in time to head the class of 1969 Otter Rock High School reunion on August 25th, asking his old friends Sherry Ayers and Tim Rossi to help him organize the reunion.
There was the volleyball game on the beach and a banquet at the Otter Crest Inn. People tended to be tactful and not ask about his prison sentence, but he told a few friends he'd been caught robbing photomat booths.
Randy moved in with his sister in Portland, got a job at Tektronix, a company that manufactured test and measurement devices such as oscilloscopes and logic analyzers, and he regularly reported to his parole officer, Judy Pulliam.
But he was cocky and egotistical, still considering himself a star athlete, bragging about having played for the Green Bay Packers. He told everyone he was going to open up a health club with a racquetball court.
Racquetball was the hot thing back then. Played in these indoor fitness centers that looked like something out of a Stanley Kubrick movie, and were half for exercise and half for socializing and picking up sex partners. It's a very preppy, yuppie jock scene that foreshadowed the coming 80s.
Randy played, had special racquetball gloves he wore, and carried his racket in a nice leather case. All elements he would eventually merge into his serial killer persona.
His mother gave him her champagne gold VW Super Beetle, which he equipped with an expensive sound system, a car he loved to show off. Honestly, he had to know that Ted Bundy had driven a very similar car.
He quit his job at Tektronix and started working as a bartender at the Cheerful Tortoise Lounge, becoming quite the playboy, in his own mind at least, and dating lots of women. But as he said,
I screwed up. I was in too much of a hurry and I got herpes. But you don't get herpes by being in a hurry. You get them from unprotected sex. And then you continue to spread them by continuing to have unprotected sex, which makes you an asshole. So be careful out there, folks. A lot of assholes in this world, unfortunately.
He was nearly 30 years old now, but he got himself a 17-year-old girlfriend who had a fake ID and worked as a cocktail waitress.
The fucking 70s, man. But even then, folks thought it was odd that a full-grown man, almost 30 years old, was obsessed with dating teenagers. Yet, they just chalked it up to him being kind of dumb and immature. A teenager mentality himself. He just wasn't very bright. He's dull, obsessed with two things: sports and himself.
This is confirmed by one slightly older woman he dated, a 25-year-old banker that thought he was good-looking and started seeing him, but dumped him pretty quickly, later saying, "He just wasn't very smart. I'm ashamed to think I dated Randy at all. He wore thin pretty quickly."
He was eventually fired from the Cheerful Tortoise for undisclosed reasons, probably for allowing all those underage drinkers to come in. And he started working at the Fawcett Tavern in Beaverton, working the night shift from 6 p.m. to closing at 2:30.
But he was fired from here as well. Very suspiciously, just 2 weeks later, $3,000 was stolen from the Fawcett cash register. There was no forced entry, and the only people who had the keys were the owners and Randy.
When the owners came to question him, they found him hiding in his sister's attic. He denied everything and threatened to sue them for defamation.
He later bragged about the burglary, said it was some sort of revenge.
After that, word went out, and no bars or taverns would hire him. His days as a Playboy bartender were over.
He worked briefly at a 7-Eleven and then at a Shakey's pizza parlor.
Man, I loved Shakey's as a little kid. The one I grew up with would show old black and white horror movies. I think we talked about this in another episode. I think it was Wayne Adam Ford worked in a Shakey's or something.
Yes. Chapter 5, 1980. Randy loved to pose for photographs, flexing his muscles, often wearing nothing but a Speedo bathing suit, sometimes completely naked.
He sent some shots to Playgirl magazine, and in May of 1980, received a letter back saying he'd been selected for a possible Guy Next Door feature. Though it appears they were never published. He probably ran a background check on him.
He moved out of his sister's house and in with a girl named Lucy Grant in Lake Grove, Oregon, with a month-to-month lease. But it didn't last long. He was constantly flirting and cheating, including with a 17-year-old girl named Julie Wrights.
Lucy says she moved out of the apartment so fast, she forgot to unplug the waterbed heater, which melted the bed and flooded the apartment. Part of me suspects she did this on purpose.
Though he tried to mask it by being polite, all-American, preppy, good boy, and Christian with a sheepish smile. The truth was, Randy was filled with simmering rage, a deep hatred of women, which eventually came bubbling to the surface in horrible and deadly ways.
When his longtime best friend and former roommate Tim Rossi told him how his fiancée, Darcy Fix, had broken up with him because he'd accepted an assistant professorship at Pacific Lutheran University in Tacoma, Randy became incredibly angry, saying that his friend's fiancée was just like all the other women out there, no good trollops and stupid bitches.
2 weeks later, on Thanksgiving Day, 1980, the bodies of Darcy and her new boyfriend Douglas Altig were found in her apartment, both shot execution style. The only thing missing from the apartment was a small silver gun with a white handle her father had given her.
Though Randy was a suspect, this murder would go unsolved until 2012, when DNA evidence finally linked him to the killings.
Then there was Sherry Ayers, who'd known Randy all her life, had gone to elementary school and high school with him, and helped him organize the class reunion. Sherry was found raped, bludgeoned, and stabbed to death in her Portland apartment. Randy was questioned and considered a suspect, as he had no alibi, but was let go because secretions in her vagina that were believed to be semen were of a different blood type than Randy's.
But That didn't exclude the possibility that she could have had sex earlier with a different man, or that the secretions themselves apparently could have been from her own vaginal moisture, is what I read. And the testing of blood and semen and other bodily fluids was just very primitive in 1980. They just didn't have the technology.
This murder would go unsolved until 2001, when technicians at the Oregon State Crime Lab linked Woodfield's DNA to the crime.
Though it was now 1980, Randy still dressed in the 1970s stereotype of what was the stylish macho man. He had the porn star mustache, perfectly groomed and luxuriant. He permed his hair, wore tight designer jeans, and large collar shirts that he kept unbuttoned nearly to his waist, showing off his broad, hairy chest, accentuated by gold chains and pendants.
And like the sleazy 70s macho man he looked like, Randy hit on every woman that he met.
It was a non-stop bombardment on the opposite sex. A deluge of phone calls, letters. He'd be driving down the road and just start waving women over. And crazily, it sometimes worked. Several women say they gave him their phone numbers after being waved down while driving, saying, he was a good-looking guy with a sweet smile.
But most women were extremely creeped out by him, or quickly grew to be. The only ones who stuck around or were genuinely impressed seemed to be teenagers.
But money was always tight, and he needed it to be whining and dining women, sending them flowers, buying them trinkets. So he hooked up with one of his old buddies from prison, Tony Neary, and the two started to commit robberies together, hitting the Safeway in Vancouver, Washington.
Tony told Randy something interesting that he took to heart. If you put tape or band-aids over your nose, witnesses will focus so intently on it that they will fail to remember your other characteristics.
I've heard former spies say things like this, namely G. Gordon Liddy, who Nixon used to break into the Watergate Hotel. G. Gordon Liddy said, "Use a disguise so weird that that's all folks will remember."
And Randy added to this by using an atrociously fake beard. And to an extent it worked. When witnesses were asked to describe him, they would say he had tape on his nose and an obviously fake beard. And though he was pretty tall, 6'2", they'd always remember him as much shorter.
After his 30th birthday, Randy moved down to Eugene, Oregon. Go Ducks! Staying at the New Oregon Motel while he looked for a more permanent place. He did not inform his parole officer of the move.
Being down in Eugene, 120 miles south, he escaped the stigma of Portland, where everyone knew him and knew he'd done prison time, not to mention the statutory rape and murders he'd been suspected of.
It was a fresh new start. Randy started playing basketball for Columbia Optical, playing center, and he was the team's high scorer. And of course, love was in the air.
Chapter 6, Shelley Jansen.
Toxic love, look how you make me happy. You take a hold of me. You take a
Shelley Jansen was a junior at the University of New Mexico in Albuquerque with a 4.0 grade point average. She was beautiful and a romantic who thought one day she'd meet her Prince Charming, a tall, dark, and handsome man who'd sweep her off her feet. And she did.
It was December 30th, 1980, and she was visiting her father in Eugene, Oregon for Christmas when she went to O'Callahan's Tavern, where she met her knight in shining armor.
His name was Randall, and he was from Portland. They danced and talked, and Shelley thought he was perfect, the one for her. Randall told her how special she was, how beautiful and magical, how they were meant to be together, that it was to be a romance for the ages.
What Shelley didn't know was that Randy Woodfield told every single girl he met those same things, and she was just one of many.
They ended up staying the night together in Randy's room at the New Oregon Motel. And the next night, New Year's Eve, they spent in Portland, celebrating at a TGI Fridays, where Randy bought her a stuffed panda bear, and spending the night at Randy's sister's house, who was out of town, visiting their parents. And the next night, she flew back to New Mexico. The two lovebirds rode back and forth constantly, she signing her letters.
Your lover, always.
Randy loved writing and receiving letters and love-bombed her like crazy. Shelley eating it all up, writing back to him.
By the way, I love you. I feel so lucky to have you in my life. I hope you are always there with me. I've been looking for someone like you all my life, and now I've found you. Thanks for walking into my life, Randall.
Meanwhile, Randy was very busy becoming the I-5 killer. His crimes were slowly escalating, becoming darker, more depraved and brazen, moving from robbery to sexual assault.
In late January, Shelley flew to San Francisco, and after robbing a deserted roller skating rink in Vancouver, a Winchell's donut shop in Grants Pass, and a Dairy Mart in Eugene, Randy drove down to meet her for what they called their Love Boat weekend, staying in touristy Fisherman's Wharf, visiting Ripley's Believe It or Not, and touring Alcatraz.
All of which is a lot of fun and can be very romantic. The fog and cable cars and the breezes from the bay. And as the sun dipped down into the Pacific Ocean, Randy asked her to marry him. And she said yes. Joy of joys. The lovebirds were engaged.
Shelley was over the moon as she got on a plane and flew back to New Mexico, and Randy Woodfield got in his Champagne Super Edition Volkswagen Bug with the Green Bay Packers sticker in the rear window and drove north up Interstate 5.
What should have been an 8-hour trip lasted over 2 whole days for Randy. He made a lot of stops along the way.
Chapter 7, The I-5 Killer.
February 3rd, 1981 in Mountain Gate. The bodies of Donna Eckert, 37, and her 14-year-old daughter, Janelle Charlotte Jarvis, in bed together in their home in Mountain Gate, California, right where the old Oregon Trail crosses over Interstate 5. They were bound with athletic tape and each had been shot several times in the head. Forensic tests showed that Janelle had been raped, most likely while her mother lay there beside her, helpless to stop it.
That same day, he robbed a Burger Express in Redding, California, taking $230, then tying up the owner and the 18-year-old salesgirl, forcing them into the bathroom and sexually assaulting them.
The very next day in Wairika, California, 70 miles north on Interstate 5, he carjacked 21-year-old Jessie Clovis, raping her and taking $20 from her purse, leaving her naked and bound with athletic tape.
And that night, he robbed a motel in Ashland, Oregon, also right on the 5, a place famous for its Shakespeare festivals.
On February 9th in Corvallis, Oregon, he robbed a fabric store, taking $300, binding the female clerk with athletic tape, bringing her into a back room and masturbating onto her face, then driving to a laundromat in Albany, Oregon, where he raped 2 women at gunpoint.
Then he kept on going, in a full berserker mode. 7-Eleven and Taco Time in Eugene, Oregon, a Greasy Spoon restaurant in Corvallis, driving the lost highway of Interstate 5, both a hunter and a soulless ghost, going from town to town beneath gray, rain-washed skies, searching the Pacific Northwest winter for vulnerable women, slipping tape onto his nose, gluing on the cheap fake beard, his athletic tape in his pocket, enacting his savagery and acts of degradation, a predator of the worst sort, literal monster from a nightmare.
On January 14th, he burst into a home in Corvallis, Oregon, and sexually assaulted 2 sisters aged 8 and 10.
4 days later in Salem, he walked into the Transamerica building, taking the 2 young cleaning ladies, Sherry Hull and Beth Wilmette, at gunpoint and forcing them to fillet him, then shooting each of them multiple times, killing Sherry Hull but miraculously only wounding Beth.
Meanwhile, detectives, sheriffs, and police from Ashland, Portland, and Eugene, Oregon, as well as Shasta, Redding, Wairika, California, were meeting to compare notes. They noticed many witnesses described the perpetrator wearing unique gloves that appeared to possibly be for racquetball. And lab analysis of the bullets confirmed all their fears. The bullets from the murders were all fired from the same gun. And the athletic tape used to bind victims was not only the same brand, but from the same roll. The torn edges matching up.
The detectives figured that a maniac like this had to have been arrested on some kind of sex crime before, and they combed the files of sexual offenders.
But because the rape charges had been dropped when Randy pled guilty to robbery, he was not in the system as a sex offender.
One detective asked, "Where do you think he'll hit next? I put money on Albany or Salem."
The other detective joined the wager, saying, "I'll match you, but I say Corvallis or Eugene."
That very night, Randy Woodfield neutralized their bet by hitting both Corvallis and Albany.
Without telling his probation officer, Randy rented a room in Springfield. Springfield is this little town right next to Eugene. Go Ducks! Quick bit of trivia, Matt Groening is from Oregon, grew up in Portland, and many people think that Springfield may be the actual home of the Simpsons.
Randy rented the room from a young single mother named Arden Bates, who was having difficulty paying the rent. Randy proved to be a good roommate. He was clean, respectful, and paid the rent on time in cash.
Arden did wonder at how he lived, though. He had no job, but brought back expensive steaks and cases of beer, was making nonstop, very expensive, long-distance phone calls, mailing out presents and sending expensive flowers, even buying her gifts. And he was constantly taking extended vacations. And when on the road, he charged his long-distance phone calls to the house, but always paid the expensive bills immediately to her in cash.
Arden also found her teenage babysitter naked in Randy's bed, which irked her.
On February 12th, the I-5 bandit had gone north and was very, very busy terrorizing Washington state.
At around 6 p.m., a man with a silver gun, fake beard, and Band-Aid on his nose robbed the Sassy Dress Shop in Vancouver. An hour and a half later, the same man was 100 miles north on the I-5 in Olympia, robbing a drive-in restaurant, sexually assaulting 2 teenage workers and locking them in a freezer. And at 10 that night, robbing a Dairy Queen in Bellevue, Washington.
Randy was a disgusting busy beaver, but he needed money because his favorite holiday was coming. He was just so excited.
Chapter 8. Valentine's Day.
Then came Valentine's Day, Randy's favorite holiday, the ultimate romantic time. He sent his fiancée Shelley in New Mexico a dozen yellow roses, and he actually sent several girls roses. But he was especially eager to celebrate in grand fashion.
He planned to throw a big party in Portland. He rented a room at the Marriott Hotel, calling girl after girl, promising to wine and dine them, girls he'd randomly encountered driving down the road, or girls he'd met in a bar, as well as some of his old buddies from high school and college.
I don't know what he was expecting from this party, inviting all these random girls, maybe, hoping it would break into an orgy or something. But sadly, for poor Randy, they all turned him down. Even his old friends from college said they had other things they wanted to do. There was to be no party at the Marriott Hotel that night. Randy was stood up and ghosted by one and all.
Aww. But it appears Randy had other plans in store anyway. He had planned on dropping in on an old friend, Julie Ann Wrights, the 17-year-old he'd briefly dated back when he'd been a bartender at the Faucet.
Julie lived with her mother in a plush duplex in Beaverton, about 7 miles away from Portland. Her mother was out of town, and Julie told her she was planning on attending a few Valentine's Day parties that night, but wasn't going with a date.
When Julie's mother returned home, she found Judy lying in the stairwell of the house. She was naked and had been shot in the back of the head. It appeared to investigators that she was running down the steps to the front door, away from someone, when whomever she was running from shot her point blank in the back of the head, just before she could reach the door.
She'd been raped, and the perpetrator was a secretor with type B blood.
Julie's mother said they always kept the front door locked, were very wary of burglars. She wouldn't have let a stranger in the house, so it had to have been someone she knew that she let into the house.
That she knew the killer was further suggested because there were 2 glasses of wine out, suggesting the killer had casually drank a glass of wine with her at one point.
A neighbor did say they had seen a Volkswagen Bug driving up and down the street that night, at one point suspiciously turning on and off their headlights.
Investigators tried to retrace Julie's steps that Valentine's Day. She'd gone to a few parties, then, around 2 a.m, told friends she was going home. There'd been no incidents, no drama, no arguments.
Julie was quite attractive. Many people told her she should get into modeling, so she had a lot of male admirers. There was an older man in his 40s who hounded her, giving her expensive presents, but he had an airtight alibi for that night. Police ended up questioning over 100 people, giving dozens of polygraph tests.
Relentlessly, investigators interviewed and questioned people over and over until finally they were interviewing a girl, a good friend of Julie's, asking her, is there anyone you can think of that Julie would have let in the house that we haven't interviewed? Anyone who had been friends of hers, knew her in some outside way, someone who didn't seem important and you may have forgotten.
Wait, she exclaimed. There's a guy, an older guy, Randy. Yes, Randy Woodfield. He worked at the Fawcett Tavern. Julie went out with him, maybe once or twice. He came on too strong, and she told me she didn't want to date him again, but then said they were going to be friends.
The detective asked if she'd mentioned him lately. Girl said no, not in about a year. They asked what kind of car he drove. She said it was a Volkswagen Bug. They asked her if she knew where this Randy was now, if he still worked at the Fawcett. She told them,
No, he got fired last fall. The last I heard, he was living in Eugene and going to bartending school.
Detectives began to investigate and discovered Randall Woodfield had been arrested multiple times for indecent exposure and had done prison time for robbery. And calling his parole officer also learned he'd been the suspect in 3 homicides in Portland, one of which he'd been eliminated from because of his type B blood.
But a secretor with type B blood is just what they were looking for with their suspect. So detectives contacted Randy's parole officer and arranged to be there for his next appointment.
The detectives drove down to Eugene from Beaverton, but Randy failed to appear for the scheduled appointment. So they drove to the house in Springfield where he rented a room on E Street.
Though his VW Bug was parked in the driveway, Randy refused to answer the door. But the detectives were persistent, banging and banging, tapping at the windows, causing a scene, until finally Randy appeared, claiming he'd overslept and gotten the dates mixed up.
Randy was hauled down to the Springfield police station and interviewed. At first, he denied he knew anyone named Julia Wrights. But then he said, I do know her, just not that well, saying he had been to her townhouse for a party once.
When questioned about his whereabouts on the night of Valentine's Day, he said he'd rented a room at the Marriott, met a girl, Jeannie or something. He couldn't remember her last name, and they'd gone around bar hopping. He didn't know where this mysterious Jeannie lived or how to get in contact with her.
A small genie snuck off to the city, strung out on lasers and slashed black blazers, and ate all your razors while pulling the waiters. Talking about Monroe and walking on Snow Snipe. New York's a go-go and everything tastes nice. The genie lives on his back. Sorry.
When asked if he would submit blood and hair samples and take a polygraph, he said,
No, that's against my principles to do that.
When asked if they could search his house, he said,
Go ahead and search. I'm curious to see what you could possibly hope to find. I have nothing to hide.
Detectives took his sheets, which contained his head and pubic hair, a receipt for a .22 caliber handgun, a gun cleaning kit, which he says he used to clean his face, a bong, a cocaine snorting device they found in his glove box, and a box of athletic adhesive tape.
They took that adhesive tape. He grew very nervous and agitated, demanding to know why they would want that.
Indeed, it was the athletic tape that made the detectives from Beaverton begin to seriously question who this guy was. They were just there for the murder of Julie Wrights. The I-5 killings were the farthest thing from their minds. But like all law enforcement from the area, they'd been briefed on the killings and knew the athletic tape had been used to bind victims. Also, a witness had seen a Volkswagen Bug at one of the fast food robberies. Plus, Randy matched the descriptions and witness drawings perfectly. And Randy had herpes, which the I-5 killer also had. And as red flag after red flag was being dropped, they started thinking this might be their guy.
They went and interviewed Arden Bates, the woman who Randy was renting the room from, and she told them how suspicious it was that Randy always had money but had no job. They asked her if they could look at her phone bill to see where he had called. She said sure and handed it to them, saying he also charged calls to her number when he was out on the road.
What they saw amazed them. He had made phone calls throughout Washington, Oregon, and California, charging them all to her number. They could see a list of places and dates going up and down the I-5 corridor, everywhere he'd been on his vast excursions, from Redding, California to Olympia, Washington.
So fucking busted, man. And Arden saw the looks on the detectives' faces and began to shiver and shake involuntarily, asking them,
"It's him, isn't it? Randy's the I-5 killer, isn't he? I've been afraid of that, but I didn't want to say it out loud."
The detectives were non-committal and simply asked her if they could keep the phone bill, then stated, "I think it would be wise if you and your son moved out of here for a while. Can you find another place to stay for a few nights?"
Arden nodded and agreed.
Chapter 9. The Investigation.
The detectives from Beaverton informed the Springfield police about the suspect living in their little community. The I-5 task force was notified, and soon law enforcement from Washington and California were now rolling into sleepy little Springfield, Oregon, turning the investigation into a bit of a shit show.
There were just too many cops and jurisdictions. Springfield police wanted to immediately get a search warrant, but the Eugene police said they should instead put Randy on surveillance. The parole officers from Portland and Eugene said they could just arrest him at any time for breaking parole. He'd had a cocaine sniffer and a bong, after all. But the other departments said they should let him stay free while they gathered evidence and laid out a case.
Blood, semen, and pubic hairs were analyzed. Witnesses were brought in to identify mug shots, and the press were able to pick up the scent. Salem, Oregon homicide detectives had told reporters they were on their way north into Washington state to look into a possible suspect, but they were now being seen in Eugene and Springfield.
In a crazy freak coincidence, an Oregon news crew set up outside a movie theater in Eugene to report that a homicide detective from Salem was now in Eugene, and not knowing that Randy Woodfield was actually in that very movie theater, and there were police outside it surveilling him.
The cops rushed up and told the news crew to film somewhere else, sparking more suspicion.
Then the Eugene Register Guard carried the headline, "Police hint of break and bandit case."
Then, somehow, it was leaked that the suspect's name was Randy, and that he was renting a room from a woman named Arden at 3622 E Street.
The press came pouring in, camping out in front of the house, interviewing neighbors, who all said Randy was a real nice guy. He was an ex-professional football player. They all really liked him.
Now investigators were horribly worried that Randy might start destroying evidence.
Inside the house, surrounded by cameras, police, homicide detectives, parole officers, Randy watched through the window, and then, this is crazy, then he goes and calls his fiancée, Shelly Jansen. Remember her in New Mexico? He calls Shelly and tells her, now is the time. He's decided they should be together. She should just quit school, pack up her things, and move to Oregon. Which she does, renting a trailer, filling it with all their possessions, quitting school and heading out of New Mexico up to Oregon, not having any inkling that her knight in shining armor, her Prince Charming, the love of her life, was now the prime murder suspect in the most massive police investigation in Oregon history.
Eugene police detectives then went to Randy's home to inform him that he resembled the perpetrator in a large number of burglaries and sexual assaults in the area.
Randy invited them in and tried to be cordial. He complained about all the police following him, the press camped out in the street, and he kept trying to bring the topic of sports up. But to the detectives' great dismay, they noticed there had been a fire in the fireplace, and lighter fluid had been used to start it.
Randy denied burning anything in the fireplace, said that was just from his landlady and her son who used lighter fluid to get green wood going. But detectives felt certain that in that fire was, among other things, a fake beard and leather racquetball gloves. They asked him, had he ever been to Corvallis?
No, he said, never.
Ever been to Seattle, Washington?
Never.
Albany, Oregon?
Nope, never been there in my life.
When was the last time you were in Redding?
Redding, California? I don't know. A very long time ago. I can't remember.
We understand you recently made a trip to California. You didn't stop in Redding?
I told you. I don't remember.
They asked him for hair and blood samples. He refused, just as he'd done with the Beaverton detectives. The Eugene detectives then told him, "We're taking you into custody on parole violation," and handcuffed his wrists behind his back. Randy saying,
"Well, I expected that. I'm not going anywhere, so I might as well just go with you."
They brought him to an interrogation room, talked to him about sports. Randy telling them how he was #1 scorer for his basketball team, Columbia Optical.
Detectives asked him,
"You consider yourself a religious man, Randy? Were you involved with religion when you were in the joint?"
"Yeah," Randy told them. "I was into religion a lot then. But somewhere along the line, I guess I just told God to take a back seat." Then the detectives leveled with him, saying,
"Randy, we have a problem that you may be able to help us out with. We have the records from Arden's phone. You called from certain cities in California and other places in southern Oregon where some of our crimes occurred, and you charged those calls to Arden's phone. We've got toll calls listed that you made in Independence and Woodburn, Oregon, on the night that Sherry Hull and Beth Wilmot were shot near outside of Salem. You seem to have been in several areas on the same day our crimes occurred. Were you in Salem on the night of Sunday, January 18th?
I might have been. I don't know. I stopped there often."
Try to remember. The records say that you made calls to Salem at 1 p.m. and at 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. on January 18th. You made a call from a booth in Independence and Woodburn. Did you drive from Independence through Salem toward Portland in the I-5 that Sunday night?
Yes.
Then you would have been a few hundred feet from where our victims were shot in Kaiser between 9 and 10:30 p.m. We'd be happy if you could give us alibis, but it seems evident that you can't do that. We think that you're the I-5 killer.
I'm not pleading guilty to that one. I am not the I-5 killer. I'm not going to defend myself because I don't have to. I travel a lot. I went to San Francisco on January 29th. I drove down there to meet Shelley, my girlfriend. I spent the weekend with my girlfriend. Then I drove back to Oregon.
Do you think you need an attorney now?
No, I don't.
I'm gonna call him for you. We'd like to help you if we could.
How are you going to help me? You want to put me away forever.
The interview is over.
You know, it's just crazy that they ended the interview with him. Because usually detectives want to talk to these guys forever. Just get them talking and talking. But in this instance, they're like, dude, you're so busted. We don't even want to talk to you.
Chapter 10. Love Lies Bleeding.
Time can never be your trusted friend or your sworn ally. No, it's the harshest mistress of all. And life is just a chain of moments spent, 1,000 hellos and goodbyes. Maybe a love like ours can lead out its call.
Meanwhile, Randy's poor fiancée, Shelley Jansen, who'd quit school and driven halfway across the country with a U-Haul trailer to be with her true love, comes rolling on into Eugene.
She starts calling Randy, excited to tell him, "I'm here." But he doesn't answer the phone. It just rang and rang and rang, and she wondered, where could he be?
Dude, she is one of countless people to roll on into Eugene and realize their peeps done been rolled up and busted. Oh, well, finally, she learned that he had been arrested. So she went to the Springfield Police Department and told them they had to be making a mistake. They had the wrong man. Her wonderful Randall couldn't possibly be the dreaded I-5 killer.
Police weren't so sure and conducted a more extensive search of the house. The silver-colored .32 pistol with the white grip was never found, but in his racquetball case, Randy did have a unique brand of .32 bullet, the same type used in the murders of Beth Wilmot, Janelle Jarvis, and Donna Eckerd. Neutron analysis suggesting they had all come from the same lot, a very rare brand.
Randy was first charged with the murder of Sherry Hall and the attempted murder of Beth Wilmot, as well as forced oral copulation. Despite the mountain of evidence against him, including that phone bill that showed him within a few hundred feet of the crime, Randy pled innocent to all charges.
Randy went to trial dressed like a dapper, preppy college student, hair permed immaculate, looking meek and mild. When Beth Wilmot, who'd been shot in the head twice and forced to fillet him, saw Randy, she balled her fists up and began to scream, "I hate you! I hate you! I hate you!" eventually having to be led away.
Beth then took the stand and told how Sherry and her were best friends, only 20 years old, that worked for her father cleaning buildings.
She explained how they'd finished their weekly cleaning of the Trans-America building, had gone to the truck and started it up, when she noticed a window was dirty and they ran inside to clean it. And when she turned the corner, a man was standing there with Sherry, a man holding a gun with a Band-Aid across his nose.
Is he in the courtroom? The district attorney asked.
He is right there, she said, pointing at Randy.
Are you sure?
No doubt that's the one.
Poor Shelley Jansen eventually took the stand to defend Randy and said her wonderful fiancé couldn't possibly be guilty. Horribly, Randy had actually given many of his rape victims herpes, and Shelley testified that she had not been given herpes, though she stated she'd only known him a couple of months and that nearly all their sexual relations had been her masturbating him with her hand, which is what he got off on.
Randy himself even took the stand in a pathetic and sad defense, but it only took the jury 3.5 hours to find Randy guilty on all counts.
And the judge delivered the maximum sentence of life in prison plus 90 years, saying if Oregon had the death penalty, he surely would have given it to him, and that there would have been no better candidate.
In October 1981, a second trial was held in Benton County, Oregon, where old Randy received sodomy and weapons charges. He was convicted and had an additional 35 years added to his already instated sentence of life in prison plus 90 years.
He was sent to Oregon State Penitentiary. It had only been a little over 2 years since he had last left that same prison. And, I'm just going to have to state, in those 2 years, he did miss Jerry Garcia playing Oregon State Prison. Good, because I wouldn't have wanted a piece of shit like him seeing something so iconic, immortal, and magical as Jerry Garcia's show there. But that's not to say Randy wasn't spiritual. In fact, he vowed to live a good Christian life.
Randy said he would seek the Lord and wanted to become a minister. Then he asked his friends to read Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to his purpose.
He was charged with counts from all over, other places in Oregon, Washington, and on August 28, 1981, California officially charged Randy with 10 counts, 2 of murder, 1 of sodomy, 2 of robbery, 3 of burglary, and 1 of rape for the deaths of Donna Eckert and her daughter Janelle, and said they would be seeking the death penalty. But for some reason or other, I don't know, Randy was never brought to court in California. I've searched and searched for a clear reason why, and I guess the reasoning is Oregon would just hold him until his sentence there was over, even though it was a life term plus 90 years with no chance of parole, plus another 35 years added to it. But basically that was Oregon snubbing California's stated want to execute him.
While in prison, Randy was still quite the imaginary playboy and had a lot of girlfriends who would send him money and nude photographs. Randy sending back old pictures of himself flexing in a Speedo.
We used to call a Speedo banana hammock.
Yep.
In a bizarre jailhouse love affair, he began writing Diane Downs, the notorious Springfield, Oregon woman who claimed to be carjacked and had shot 3 of her children, killing one and paralyzing another.
Randy wrote Diane Downs, the other infamous Oregon psycho killer, love letters, saying he was innocent and she was beautiful, and he understood her anguish and he loved her. He sent her photographs of himself flexing his muscles in a bathing suit. One of the letters, a particularly steamy one, says, and this is a direct quote,
Oh, God. Get ready for this. Here we go. I will be stroking Junior to your photo at exactly midnight on Saturday night, Diane. Will you remember to touch your body for me and say my name? Just a game to play together, because I feel you close to me and want to climax my juices in memory of our togetherness like this. You brighten my life, dear friend.
vomit, vomit, vomit.
Yeah.
They also sent each other Bible verses and religious pamphlets.
Randy even asked the infamous murdering mother to marry him, and she accepted. But it all blew up in some dramatic fashion when she announced to the press, and he denied it all. And damn, that Randy stood up another woman at the altar.
Over his many years in prison, Randy Woodfield has married 3 women and divorced twice.
And today, Randy sits in Oregon State Penitentiary, where he still declares his innocence, though new advances in DNA continue to tie him directly to murders, and he is now suspected of having killed up to 44 women.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of Randall Brent Woodfield, the I-5 killer. Thank you so much, as always, for listening.
And do you have a case you want us to cover? Or you just want to say hi? Did we get something wrong? Reach out to us anytime. We love it at murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. That's murdercoasterpodcast@gmail.com. We will see you next week with another tale of madness and murder.